The man stood up in the middle of my mother's funeral. His voice cut through the chapel like broken glass, sharp and impossible to ignore. Everyone turned to look at him. I was sitting in the front row, clutching the folded program so hard my fingers had gone numb. My eyes were fixed on the closed casket when he said it. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. Then louder, desperate, like he couldn't hold it in anymore. "She never told you, did she?" The priest froze mid-prayer. My aunt gasped beside me. Someone in the back dropped a hymn book, and the sound echoed through the silent chapel. The man's eyes locked onto mine. They were red-rimmed, wet, pleading. "I'm your father." The word hit me like a physical blow. Father. My stomach twisted violently. The room tilted sideways. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes swing toward me, hungry for my reaction, waiting to see me break. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, frozen, while my mother's biggest lie crawled out of her coffin and took its first breath in front of everyone I knew. The whispers started immediately. "Did you know? Is it true? That poor girl." People shifted in their seats, craning their necks to get a better look at me. My stepfather sat rigid beside me, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He didn't look at me. Not once. The stranger kept staring at me from across the aisle, his face twisted with something between hope and desperation, like he was waiting for me to acknowledge him. To forgive him. To do something. I felt exposed. Stripped naked in front of everyone. This was supposed to be the one place I could grieve in peace. The one moment where I could say goodbye to my mother without drama or complications. Instead, she had humiliated me one last time, even from beyond the grave. And that was when I understood. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. My mom lied about my real father. And I found out the truth at her funeral. In front of everyone. My name is Natalie Pierce. I'm 31 years old, and up until 3 days ago, I thought I knew who I was. I work as a senior operations coordinator at Meridian Logistics, a regional firm that handles supply chain management. It's not glamorous work, but it's stable. Or at least it was. My mother raised me to believe that stability mattered more than anything else. Keep your head down. Smile when you need to. Don't ask uncomfortable questions. Don't make waves. I followed those rules my entire life. I was the reliable one. The invisible one. The one who never caused problems. And I believed her. I trusted that she was teaching me how to survive in a world that didn't care about people like us. But now I understood the truth. She wasn't teaching me to be strong. She was teaching me to be silent. Because silence protected her secrets. And her biggest secret had just been exposed in the worst possible way. I went back to work 3 days after the funeral. I wore my black blazer and neutral makeup. I kept my voice calm and steady. I was still grieving, but grief doesn't stop deadlines. It doesn't pause meetings or delay quarterly reports. During our Monday morning team meeting, my supervisor Vanessa leaned back in her leather chair with her arms crossed. Her eyes were sharp and calculating as they swept across the conference room before landing on me. "Natalie," she said casually, like she was discussing the weather. "Are you emotionally ready to handle client-facing responsibilities right now?" The room went completely silent. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see how I would respond. I knew what she was really asking. She wanted to know if I was going to be a liability. If I was going to break down in front of clients. If my personal drama was going to reflect badly on the company. "I am," I said firmly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll revisit that." And just like that, she reassigned my biggest account to someone else. The office knew everything. Someone always knows. I'm not sure who told them, but by Tuesday afternoon, everyone had heard about the funeral. About the stranger who stood up and claimed to be my father. About how my entire life had been built on a lie. I passed co-workers whispering by the coffee machine. They stopped talking the moment they saw me, but I could feel their eyes following me down the hallway. Someone avoided making eye contact with me in the elevator. Someone else watched me through the glass wall of the conference room like I was a fascinating exhibit at a museum. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room, forcing myself to eat a sandwich I couldn't taste. That's when I heard them. 2 women from accounting, sitting just around the corner where they thought I couldn't hear. "Did you hear about Natalie's mom?" one of them whispered. "Apparently her whole life is a lie." Can you imagine? They weren't offering sympathy. They were gossiping. I was entertainment. A story to share over coffee. Vanessa had always had favorites. Everyone knew it. There was one coworker in particular, a loud and confident woman named Bethany, who never stayed late but somehow always got praised for her dedication. She got all the high-profile projects, all the visibility with upper management, all the protection when things went wrong. And now she was getting my projects too. During a team check-in that Thursday, Vanessa made it official. "Bethany will be taking over the Anderson account," she announced, glancing at me with what might have been pity or might have been satisfaction. "Natalie needs time to focus on her personal situation. As a company, we can't afford distractions during our busiest quarter." My hands tightened into fists under the table. Distraction. That's what I was now. Not a person who had just lost her mother. Not an employee with 6 years of excellent performance reviews. Just a distraction. Like my grief was inconvenient. Like my entire identity crisis was somehow unprofessional. But I didn't argue. I nodded. I smiled. And I started planning. The following week, HR called me in for what they described as a routine update. Nothing to worry about, they assured me. I sat across from 2 administrators while they slid a thick file across the polished desk. Emergency contact forms. Insurance beneficiary records. Internal compliance documents. Standard paperwork that every employee had to keep current. I flipped through the pages slowly, my chest tightening with each one I reviewed. Every single form listed my stepfather Kenneth as my biological parent. Every single one was signed by my mother. Years of official records, all based on a lie. And now that lie was part of my employment file. Part of the company's legal documentation. I looked up at the HR representatives, who were watching me with professional concern. "These are all incorrect," I said quietly. They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We'll need documentation to update them," one said carefully. "Birth certificates, legal records, that sort of thing." But we both knew what they were really thinking. Changing these records would raise questions. And questions were the last thing anyone wanted. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes after that meeting, staring at the file in my hands. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was procedural. Institutional. My mother's lie had been officially recorded, repeated, trusted, and embedded into systems that weren't designed to accommodate complicated truths. And suddenly, everything started making sense. The timing of my demotion. Vanessa's sudden concern about my emotional stability. The way she had reassigned my projects before I'd even had a chance to prove I could handle them. None of it was accidental. My mother's secret was creating ripples I hadn't anticipated. Questions the company didn't want to deal with. Complications that made me more trouble than I was worth. I wasn't being managed. I was being managed out. Quietly. Professionally. With plausible deniability. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. Not anymore. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten on expensive stationery, the kind that felt substantial between my fingers. The return address meant nothing to me, but when I opened it, I recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to the man from the funeral. My biological father. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg for a relationship or demand that I acknowledge him. He simply apologized. For staying silent. For letting my mother lie. For not being brave enough to claim me when it mattered. And then he enclosed documents. Birth records with both our names listed. Old court filings from a paternity case that had been settled quietly decades ago. Financial disclosures that showed he'd been paying child support through a third party for years. But it was the last document that made my blood run cold. A list of investments and business connections from 20 years ago, including one name I recognized immediately. Meridian Logistics. My company's parent organization. He had been an investor. A silent partner. Until he wasn't. I read the documents 3 times, cross-referencing dates and names until the pattern became unmistakable. My biological father, Thomas Bradford, had been a founding investor in the company that eventually became Meridian's parent organization. He had put in significant capital in the early days, back when the company was just starting to expand regionally. But 15 years ago, he had been quietly removed from the investor pool. No scandal. No announcement. Just a clean exit that had been buried in legal paperwork and corporate restructuring. And Vanessa had been there. Not as a supervisor back then, but as a junior account manager who had handled the fallout. Who had managed the clients who were nervous about the change in leadership. Who had built her entire career on proving she could smooth over complications and protect the company's reputation. This wasn't coincidence. This was history. And I was standing right in the middle of it. The quarterly performance review happened exactly 2 weeks later. Vanessa did it publicly, in front of the entire senior staff. She stood at the head of the conference room with a presentation clicker in her hand, her expression professionally concerned. Natalie's performance has declined significantly over the past month, she said, clicking to a slide that showed my supposedly dropping metrics. We're concerned about her ability to focus during this difficult personal time. As managers, we have to consider what's best for both the employee and the team. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my face neutral. I let her finish. Let the room absorb her words. Let everyone believe that I was the problem. Because I had learned something important from my mother's lie. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet and let people underestimate you. Let them think they've won. And then strike when they're not expecting it. I stopped defending myself after that meeting. I stopped trying to explain or justify or prove my worth. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every email Vanessa sent. Every project she reassigned. Every meeting where she questioned my competence in front of colleagues. I created detailed timelines showing how my workload had been systematically reduced despite my performance metrics remaining strong. I saved screenshots of client feedback praising my work. I documented every interaction with HR, every conversation about my mother's death, every subtle way I was being pushed out. I worked quietly and precisely, staying late after everyone else had gone home. Grief had hollowed me out, but it had also sharpened me. Made me focused in a way I had never been before. My mother had taught me to be invisible. Now I was using that invisibility as a weapon. And Vanessa had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks after the performance review, Vanessa made her first real mistake. She sent an email she shouldn't have. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and she was rushing to leave for a weekend trip. The email was meant for Bethany, discussing how to manage the Natalie situation moving forward. But she accidentally copied someone else. Not me. Someone in corporate compliance. Someone who was required by policy to flag certain language. Language like liability and risk management and documentation for termination. I only found out because the compliance officer forwarded it to HR with a request for clarification. And HR, following protocol, included me in the thread so I could provide my perspective. I read the email 4 times, my heart pounding harder with each pass. Then I saved it to 3 different locations. Printed 2 copies. And sent one to my personal email account. This was exactly what I needed. Evidence that this wasn't about my performance. It was about making me disappear. 2 days later, corporate headquarters announced an internal audit. It was framed as a routine compliance review, something they did every few years to make sure regional offices were following proper procedures. But the timing was interesting. Very interesting. Suddenly, people who had seemed untouchable were nervous. Vanessa laughed it off during a staff meeting, waving her hand dismissively. "I've been here longer than anyone," she said confidently. "I know these audits inside and out. Nothing to worry about." But I noticed the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she started double-checking her email recipients before hitting send. The way she called Bethany into her office more frequently for long, private conversations. Arrogance makes people careless. My mother had taught me that too, though she probably hadn't meant to. She had been so confident that her lie would never be discovered. So certain that she had covered all her tracks. Until a stranger stood up at her funeral and proved her wrong. HR called me in again the following week. This time, the tone was different. Less routine, more investigative. They asked questions about my personnel file. About the emergency contact forms and the insurance beneficiary records. About why certain information hadn't been corrected sooner. Why didn't you update these forms when you first noticed the discrepancies? One of the administrators asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. I had prepared for this question. I slid a folder across the desk toward them. Inside were printed emails showing the 3 times I had requested to update my records. Each time, I had been told it wasn't urgent. That it could wait. That we needed proper documentation first. I tried, I said calmly, meeting her eyes. I was discouraged from making changes without going through proper channels. And then my mother died, and the situation became more complicated. The room went very quiet. They exchanged meaningful glances. Made notes on their pads. Thanked me for my time. And I knew I had just planted a seed that would grow into something much bigger. The audit team began conducting interviews the next week. They were thorough and professional, speaking with employees at every level of the organization. When they called me in, I told them the truth. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just factually. I described how my workload had been reduced after my mother's funeral. How projects had been reassigned without explanation. How my supervisor had publicly questioned my competence during the quarterly review. I showed them my performance metrics, which contradicted every claim Vanessa had made about my declining work quality. I walked them through the timeline of events, from my mother's death to my demotion to the email Vanessa had accidentally sent. And then I showed them Thomas Bradford's documents. The ones proving he had been an investor. The ones showing his quiet removal from the company 15 years ago. The ones suggesting that Vanessa had known exactly who I was from the moment I was hired. And had been waiting for an excuse to push me out quietly. The change was subtle at first. Vanessa stopped smiling as much. She started closing her office door during phone calls. She snapped at Bethany during a team meeting, something I had never seen her do before. People noticed. Co-workers who had always treated Vanessa with deference started questioning her decisions. Someone openly disagreed with her during a presentation. Someone else sit her supervisor on an email that would have previously stayed internal. Then, during a routine budget meeting, she interrupted the finance director mid-sentence. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly, her professional mask slipping. "We've always done it this way. Why are we suddenly changing procedures?" The room went silent. The finance director raised his eyebrows. "We're following the audit recommendations," he said carefully. "I suggest you review them." For the first time in 6 years, I saw Vanessa look uncertain. Defensive. Almost afraid. And I knew the foundation was starting to crack. 3 days later, the audit team released their preliminary findings to senior leadership. I wasn't supposed to know what was in the report, but someone from HR left a document on the printer. Just long enough for me to see the highlighted sections before they retrieved it. What I saw confirmed everything I had suspected. The report detailed a pattern of favoritism in Vanessa's department. Documented policy violations regarding performance reviews and project assignments. Raised questions about conflict of interest related to the historical investor situation. And specifically mentioned my case as an example of potential retaliation and discrimination. The following morning, Vanessa was called into a closed-door meeting with corporate leadership. She was there for 3 hours. When she emerged, her face was pale and tight. That afternoon, an email went out announcing that she was being placed on administrative leave pending further review. Effective immediately. She was escorted to her office to collect personal items. Then escorted out of the building. No speech. No explanation. Just silence. HR scheduled a meeting with me the next morning. This time, it wasn't in the small conference room they used for routine updates. It was in the executive suite, with the regional director present. They apologized. Formally. Professionally. With documentation that made it clear this was a legal necessity as much as a moral one. They acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly following my mother's death. That my performance had not declined despite what had been claimed. That the reassignment of my projects and the public questioning of my competence had been inappropriate and unsupported by evidence. They offered my previous accounts back, with a compensation adjustment for the time I had been improperly demoted, with a formal letter of apology for my personnel file, and with a quiet suggestion that this matter could be resolved internally, without need for further action. I took the letter, read it carefully, and told them I would consider their offer. 2 days later, I received a phone call from corporate headquarters. Not HR. Not the regional director. The executive leadership team. They wanted to meet with me in person. I drove 3 hours to their main office, wondering what was coming next. They sat me down in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 3 executives, all watching me with careful assessment. "We need someone in Vanessa's role," one of them said. "Someone who understands the system from the inside. Someone who has proven they can stay steady under pressure. Someone ethical enough to flag problems instead of covering them up." They didn't say it directly, but I understood. They needed someone invisible. Someone who wouldn't attract attention or create scandal. Someone who had been overlooked for so long that nobody would question their sudden promotion. Someone exactly like me. They offered me the position. Department supervisor. Vanessa's old job. With a salary increase and full authority to restructure my team. I didn't answer immediately. I asked for time to think about it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with Thomas Bradford's letter in my hands. My biological father. The man my mother had hidden from me for 31 years. I thought about her fear. Her desperation to control the narrative. Her belief that lying was safer than trusting the truth. She had taught me to be invisible. To stay quiet. To never make waves. And in doing that, she had given me the perfect camouflage. She had made me someone people underestimated. Someone they ignored until it was too late. I thought about Vanessa, who had assumed I would break. Who had believed I was too weak to fight back. Who had never considered that silence could be strategy instead of submission. And I realized that my mother's greatest lie had accidentally given me my greatest weapon. The next morning, I called corporate headquarters. And I accepted the position. The official announcement went out the following week. Natalie Pierce promoted to department supervisor, effective immediately. Some people were surprised. Others seemed relieved to have someone steady in charge after the chaos of the audit. Bethany requested a transfer to a different department. I approved it without comment. I didn't gloat. Didn't make speeches about justice or karma. I just quietly started doing the job. Reviewing projects. Meeting with clients. Rebuilding the team's processes to be more transparent and fair. And slowly, carefully, making sure that no one else would be pushed out the way I had been. That no one else would be silenced because they were inconvenient. That no one else would be labeled a distraction just for being human. My mother had taught me to survive by hiding. I was teaching myself to thrive by standing firm. The final audit report was released 6 weeks after I took over the department. Vanessa's termination was confirmed. Not with drama or public announcement. Just a quiet removal from the company directory and the distribution of her responsibilities. She didn't fight it. Didn't try to appeal. Just accepted the severance package and disappeared from our professional world. I heard later that she had moved to a different state. Taken a job at a smaller firm where nobody knew her history. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt tired. Grief has a way of changing you from the inside out. My mother's death had broken something in me. But it had also revealed something I hadn't known was there. Strength. Patience. The ability to endure humiliation without breaking. The willingness to document and wait and strike when the moment was right. Vanessa had underestimated me because I was grieving. She had assumed my silence meant weakness. She had been wrong. I walked into my new office on my first official day as permanent supervisor. It was larger than my old workspace, with windows that actually opened and a door I could close when I needed to think. I sat down slowly in the leather chair, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. For the first time in my entire career, no one spoke over me in meetings. No one dismissed my ideas as unrealistic. No one treated me like I was lucky to be there. I had earned this. Not through my mother's connections. Not through charm or loud confidence. Through patience. Through documentation. Through refusing to disappear just because someone wanted me to. I thought about the man at the funeral. Thomas Bradford. My biological father. I still hadn't contacted him. Wasn't sure if I ever would. But I kept his letter in my desk drawer. A reminder that some truths, no matter how painful, are worth knowing. That lies protect the wrong people for the wrong reasons. And that silence isn't always surrender. My mom lied about my real father. She lied to protect herself. To avoid complications. To maintain control over a narrative that was never entirely hers to control. And when that lie was finally exposed, it nearly destroyed me. My workplace tried to erase me to protect power. To avoid uncomfortable questions. To maintain the illusion that everything was fine. They both failed. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by fighting openly or demanding justice loudly. I won by staying. By watching. By documenting everything and waiting for the right moment. By knowing my worth when everyone else doubted it. Vanessa was gone. My mother was gone. Thomas Bradford sent one more letter, which I still haven't opened. I might someday. Or I might not. Because I've learned that the truth doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes it just needs to be known. And I know who I am now. Not because of who my parents were. Not because of what title I hold or what office I occupy. But because I survived being erased. And came back stronger. That's the truth my mother never taught me. And it's the one I'll never forget.